Ladies and gentlemen, the founder of the Sphinx organization, Dworkin.
On this 10th year anniversary of Sphinx performances here at Carnegie Hall, I felt compelled to speak not only to all of you with us this evening, but also to our field and nation as a whole regarding Sphinx's mission and the state of American orchestras. There ought to be more and better qualified teaching throughout the country in schools so that blacks can take advantage of that. There should be more scholarships given them at such places as Juilliard, Curtis, Eastman, etc. And they should be heard when they are in the growing stage instead of having to wait until it is too late. These are not my words, but rather the exact words, other than my substitution of black for the historical term Negro, of one of America's greatest conductors, Leonard Bernstein, who majestically led the New York Philharmonic in this very hall and others. He wrote those words in the New York Times in 1947, just 2 years after the end of World War II, and 23 years before I was even born. Leonard's son, Alexander, is here with us this evening. It was not until 20 years later that Henry Lewis became the first black music director of a major American orchestra, the New Jersey Symphony. And today, there are no black music directors of America's major orchestras, that being the top 25. Bernstein stated, quote, "I would like to have seen much more happen than did happen. As a private citizen, I would be impelled to do something about it," unquote. Bernstein had hired Sanford Allen, who sat on this stage where our Sphinx Virtuosi members have stood this evening, as the first black member of the New York Philharmonic and one of only 2 blacks in major orchestras at the time. Sanford is here with us this evening. I now speak to you, almost 70 years after Bernstein's initial writings in the Times, and over 50 years after he hired Sanford Allen, and his orchestra, the New York Philharmonic, has no full-time black members and has not for over 5 years. There are also no Latino members of the orchestra. A decade ago, the Chicago Symphony hired the first black in the history of their orchestra, and he remains the only black member ever hired by that orchestra. In addition, they have only 1 Latino amongst their ranks. Nationally, only about 4% of orchestras are black and Latino combined. As it relates to repertoire, less than 1% of all of the works performed by orchestras are by any composer of color. An orchestra's administrative leadership is even less representative of our society, with less than half of 1% of executive directors being either Latino or black. So my question is, at what point are we actually going to all feel impelled to act in our professional capacities? We are now 66 years after the nation's most well-known conductor knew this was an issue and stated publicly what needed to be done. And basically, our field has very little to show for it. Those who are currently in the positions of leadership within orchestras and those policy and decision makers in the philanthropic community are the ones who will bring about this change, or we will never realize the hopes and dreams of those who came before us. Before I was born, the maestro whose talents graced this very stage stated that the field had an obligation to seek out musicians of color and give them aid and encouragement. One of the most basic ways to do that is through a traditional fellowship, where someone gets high-level training, mock auditions, and can perform regularly with the orchestra. Yet, in 2013, there are only 3 major American orchestras, Detroit, Baltimore, and Pittsburgh, with an active, formal fellowship program that incorporates these 3 areas of impact. Actually employing his beliefs in action, Bernstein implemented a policy where every time a position opened, the orchestra actively reached out to identify candidates of color. Amias Ames, the president of the New York Philharmonic at the time, stated, quote, "For about 10 years, we have specifically notified both the Urban League and CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, of every audition and have made other inquiries in an effort to learn of available and qualified Black symphonic musicians," unquote. The Urban League actually recommended Sanford Allen to the New York Philharmonic 4 years before he became their first Black member. So what is our field doing today to actively seek out talented musicians of color? It is my unfortunate duty to share with you that in Sphinx's 16-year history, we have never, ever had any major American orchestra reach out to us to share when their upcoming auditions for full-time members were being held, or even ask if we could suggest any potential candidates of color who should be informed of those auditions. In addition, today, there is not a single major American orchestra, again, that being the top 25, with an inclusion initiative that has focused on and resulted in any significant change in the cultural diversity of its staff, board, or membership on stage. This is the 10th year anniversary from when Sphinx musicians first graced this stage. There is no doubt that there is a pool of qualified, talented musicians. The Sphinx virtuosi have received rave reviews in the New York Times and dozens of papers across the country. Sphinx is acutely aware of the paramount importance of artistic excellence and shares orchestra's view that it must be a priority. A number of our alumni have joined the ranks of America's professional orchestras, including majors such as the Philadelphia Orchestra. The notion that orchestras cannot be culturally inclusive without decreasing their artistic excellence is a patently ridiculous argument and is one that has not been borne out in other fields such as academia or the corporate world, where actually those corporations that are more inclusive perform better. Now, you might think I'm calling out America's orchestras, especially the New York Philharmonic, whom I do not mean to single out, but rather to use as an indicator. This challenge of inclusiveness is a story that can be told across the over 1,000 orchestras that dot the landscape of our nation. The New York Philharmonic is one of the greatest orchestras on the planet, and Bernstein was passionate about the role of artistic excellence, as am I. But I am not calling out America's orchestras. I am calling upon them. For 16 years, beginning with the National Symphony Orchestra in Washington, D.C., Sphinx has partnered with America's orchestras, and I currently sit on the board of directors of the League of American Orchestras, where we have various initiatives related to inclusion being explored and launched, and I am excited about the potential of those programs. Sphinx laureates have performed as soloists with dozens of orchestras across the country, including the New York Philharmonic. Many orchestras have and continue to try to tackle the challenges of inclusion in a host of ways. So we have and continue to accomplish some good things. But they are not great things. And most importantly, they are not the things we need to accomplish if our art form, in particular orchestral music, is to not only survive, but thrive in any similar manner to its current form. In February, the International Convening on Diversity in the Performing Arts, SphinxCon, will be held in Detroit, where ideas and solutions related to these critical issues are shared, debated, and disseminated to enable action across the field. SphinxCon.org has an online discussion section where these issues are discussed throughout the year, and I encourage all of you to share your feedback on my address through that forum. Isaac Stern's name graces this hall in which we now find ourselves, and his initiative and actions saved this incredible venue from being destroyed. Linda Stern is here with us this evening. Mr. Stern came to the inaugural Sphinx competition 16 years ago, and separate from his support of our laureates by inviting them to his studio here in New York for years until his passing, it is the words that he spoke to me in the alley behind Hill Auditorium in Ann Arbor, Michigan, after hearing our finalists that had the greatest impact for me, when he shared, quote, "I had no idea this talent was out here, Aaron. Thank you for inviting me," unquote. For 16 years, Sphinx has been inviting and encouraging in a manner that has given us a reputation for persistence. But in the end, our results are simply not good enough. They are not good enough for our art form and its evolution, which is what drove me to stay up late nights as a college student working on this dream. Leonard Bernstein conversed about these issues since before I was born. And while he took some historic actions that at least brought about more Black representation than the orchestra reflects today, his efforts ultimately, even by his own admission, were incomplete. However, things are possible now that were not possible when he led one of the greatest orchestras in history. We need orchestras to do more now. We need the philanthropic community to do more now. And we, our communities, the audiences, need to do more now. And so tonight, I call upon our field to consider two policies to implement to begin to address this issue. First, every single orchestra in our country commit 5% or more of its budget to inclusion initiatives and establish metrics for success. With the financial pressures that orchestras face these days, this is not an easy proposition. But inclusion is a complex problem that must be addressed and has challenged our field for decades. And any solution that brings about real change will require sacrifice. And the second policy, every arts grant maker require an orchestra to have an inclusion plan for its artistic membership, repertoire, audience, staff, and board, and be achieving identified metrics to be eligible to receive funding. The reality is that the philanthropic community wields tremendous influence over our field. If it demanded action related to inclusion to get a grant, we would see action all across the field. As I speak, the service organization for this segment of the philanthropic community, Grant Makers in the Arts, are meeting in Philadelphia, and I ask them to consider this as a best practice for their members. And this is not a new idea. For years, for-profit companies that supply the federal government with services have been required by law to have a supplier diversity program. Now, implementing those two policies is a start, but it is only a beginning. And while it is probably never a good idea for a grantee to comment on the effectiveness of grantors, I am compelled by Sphinx's mission to give voice to these ideas if it can potentially make a difference. If the philanthropic community is committed to correcting the vast underrepresentation of our society in the arts, it would allocate the majority of its resources towards that end. However, it does not. Of the over $2 billion given to the arts in this country, not enough is specifically targeted to benefit underserved communities. The most significant change agents in the arts sector are often smaller organizations that tend to be more agile, responsive to their communities, entrepreneurial, and able to adapt. Einstein stated that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. At some point, the philanthropic community needs to seek out and provide major funding to new partners if they hope to realize the change that they seek. Finally, I want to address you, that being our community, our audiences, and most importantly, our young people, many of who are here this evening. You must not be passive observers of this art form, which is integral to who we are as a people. You must be active participants, as that can often bring about more change than any policy or initiative. You must be diligent in your pursuit of excellence through your own artistic practice. You must buy tickets to the performances that are of interest to you. You must support the organizations that strive to serve you and your community, and you must advocate for the change you wish to see in the institutions you treasure but feel ostracized from. I do not believe that today there is significant active prejudice practiced by the leaders in our sector. However, there is a profound sound of silence that echoes in the unfilled halls we have built to practice our art form. Martin Luther King Jr., referencing Dante, said, quote, "The hottest places in hell are reserved for those who in a period of moral crisis maintain their neutrality. There comes a time when silence is betrayal," unquote. I believe this issue of inclusion in our orchestras and in the arts constitutes a moral crisis within a form of expression that is vital to our culture as a thriving society. And I believe those who remain silent in voice or in action betray the music, the art that in the end we all strive to honor. Thank you very much for letting us share the talents of our musicians and composers with you over the past 10 years. I am truly honored to have this be my life's work. Thank you.